good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Hey, there's this thing that I don't know how much people really have given thought to it, but if you were to take someone, let's say from 1960, I don't mean the 60s as in the flower child period, that didn't occur till the last part of the 1960s, but take someone from 1960, a typical young adult, and then hurl them forward, some sort of time machine or something, hurl them forward to today. I wonder what they would think. I wonder how they would perceive society. And ultimately, would they think some occupying force had come in and actually was in the process of depopulating, so to speak, the society or breaking it down? Because ultimately, I think you would see a lot of patterns that we're used to now. We've gotten used to it. We see the new norm as normal. But perhaps if you were to look at it from the eyes of someone from that era, it wouldn't be so normal. And perhaps we're the ones that are in the wrong. And I'm not saying necessarily it's some sort of conspiracy to wipe out the United States. I'm not saying that. But it sure would appear to be when you look at the manifestations of current social trends today, because they are unsustainable. That's right, they are totally unsustainable if you want to maintain a culture, the culture we call the United States today. So let's take a look at some of these and realize maybe why it's not so preposterous to say that the policies that we're following now are not something that can sustain a culture over the long term. And I'm not talking about environmental policies, okay? I mean, we could save that for another show. There's a lot of things we're doing today that's bad for the environment. But I'm talking about the human environment. Because ultimately, humans are, in a sense, part of their own biome or their own environment, so to speak. Now, before I start going into the basic premise here, I would encourage people to subscribe to this station, keep up on newer shows coming up, and also check out my new sci-fi novel, The Destiny of Our Past. And it deals with a society in which the elite are trying to erase the commoners, so to speak. Essentially, everyone that's not them. So anyway, I was inspired to do this because I saw someone making a post on Facebook, and she brought up a really good point. She just said that a very simple statement, that we are undergoing a depopulation agenda that ultimately is aimed at us not having kids. And then I remember that I had made a post just in praise of large families a while back. And it surprised me that even though most of the people who were on there were conservative on this particular page, I was getting, a few people that were like, yay, that's, big families are great. But I was getting a lot of negative feedback. I just had one kid and that's enough. Don't tell me what to do. And those are conservatives. Or people, not even having kids at all. And then the other day I saw an article. I can't remember exactly what publication it came out of, but I've seen several to this effect, that was talking about many young millennials choosing only to have what's called fur babies. And what that is that they substitute, and I'm saying they because I don't believe women are the only ones that have maternal instincts. They substitute their maternal drives and instincts to create a family onto dogs. Now, of course, we know about, middle age, the whole thing about, the term crazy cat woman, or crazy cat lady, usually referring to someone who's past their reproductive years and they never had kids, so they start getting cats to fulfill those needs that were not met with kids and grandkids. Now, with this new trend, you see younger people who are consciously, saying, well, we got dogs. We don't need kids. Some of them taking it to an extreme where they actually, everything, family portraits. It's, husband, wife, the dogs, and taking the dog out to birthday parties, to the, so the pizzerias that cater to families and birthdays and stuff. And I'm just wondering why this is. And then, of course, the average person, if you ask them, they're going to say this has to do with economics, that maybe people are finding having children to be an expensive proposition and so forth. In relative dollars and so forth, I don't think you would find that big a difference between 1960 and today. Yes, it costs more to do this, or this, but at the same time, in 1960, you didn't have as much income in U.S. dollars. And yes, there has been massive increases in some sectors as opposed to others, but ultimately it kind of evens out to where really it's expectations that have outpaced actual economic circumstances. But you see, this is interesting because I think that ultimately human beings think at two different levels. One is at the cognitive level. Some people will say, well, that's at the cerebral cortex level. The part where if you throw out a question, they will answer it, but they will answer it in the sense that it has to make intellectual sense. It has to come across in a way that's like, here's why I'm doing this. Point A, B, C, and D. But really what really motivates people is more at the, and again, this is a simplification, the hypothalamus level. It is the subconscious level. It is the things that make no real rational sense. They're more at the emotional level. And those are the things that perhaps are the true reasons we do something, this, that, or whatever. Now, traditionally, that has been a good thing. Traditionally, when it comes to the family. Because traditionally, you had a situation in which the, having a family is difficult in many ways. I mean, if you're a woman, you're carrying a baby for 9 months, giving birth, taking care of it for the father. It's the same. I mean, he's having to take care of the child too, ideally. And it's a sacrifice. It really is. But at an emotional level, it is something that has kept us going because we enjoy it. At least we were, in the old days, we were reinforced for enjoying it. I still remember, first child. The wife gives birth. It's like, hey, or am I ever going to do this again? I don't think so. And then right after the birth, it's like, oh, I can't wait till we do this again. And the doctor said, this is really, really, really common. And so, that's emotional. That's it. But traditionally, again, the emotions that propelled us to survive as a species is what kept us alive. If we were all very rational Mr. Spock type people, I don't know if we would have survived as a species. It's more like a lot of times conception takes place when people aren't really thinking so much about the consequences. Then it was like, oh, we're pregnant, okay. And then you just go through. And then, of course, children bring incredible feedback in your life. Yeah, I'd say quality of life. And that's going to be something that, regardless of how difficult it is, it's going to come out positive later. In fact, you'll find that older people that never had kids, they regret it. At least the ones I've talked to. The ones that maybe only had one kid, almost all of them will say, I really wish I'd had more kids when I had a chance. I was talking to a woman the other day. She had 2 kids. And she was just like, my gosh, if I hadn't gotten started so late, I wish I'd started a little younger and then we would have had more. And this is something that really, I would signifies that what counts is the emotion. It really does. Now, the thing is that there were a lot of forces back in the 1950s that really wanted to change society. But the problem was, and these were mostly left-wing, the problem was society seemed entrenchable. You had people coming out of the war situation, World War II, in Western society that were enjoying a lifestyle that was much better than their parents had ever enjoyed. You could go to work on one income, and you could do pretty good. And so the message of let's overthrow this and be like the Soviet Union, where they didn't even have, many people never even had shoes. This was not something that people were thinking, wow, that sounds cool, let's do it. It'd be like today saying, we need to all live like they do in North Korea. I don't think except for maybe some people on campuses, liberal campuses in the United States, I don't think we'd get too many people saying that would be a good thing. In fact, I don't see too many of these people who do say it would be wonderful actually booking a flight and going over and living in North Korea. So ultimately what happened was that these people had to figure out a way back in the 50s to bring the society that they considered a form of perpetuation of fascism. Yes, they actually believed, when you got right down to it, the family perpetuated fascism because it perpetuated the state, which they considered fascist. That the only way to do that would be to bring into question the entire family structure, amongst other things, but that was the main focus. Now, I mentioned this before in shows, but there was a psychologist. He wasn't the only one, okay? He was not the only one. But there was a guy named Wilhelm Reich, who is often considered the father of the sexual revolution. He was a student of Freud, perhaps his best student. And Freud, a lot of times people think Freud was some sort of left-wing radical. He was not, okay? By today's standards, he would be hyper-conservative. But Freud believed that you had to keep instincts and drives under control. You had to repress the carnal man, the instincts and drives that were more survival oriented, because once you had a civilization, then those drives would destroy it. Okay, so in order to maintain a sense of cohesion, a sense of cooperation, you can't be cheating with your best friend's wife or husband. Okay, you can't go around beating up someone who irritates you at work. You have to keep these things under control. Now, of course, in Freud's theory, the more you control these drives, the more they will come out in other areas. Like I have a puppy right now. Cute golden retriever lab mix. Wonderful, affectionate dog. When she needs to go out to the bathroom, which in her world, that's, that's something she can't control, but she can control when and where she does it, because she knows there's consequences if she doesn't, follow the rules. She gets nervous and starts, kind of being a little bit bitey, a little bit aggressive, and so forth. And that tells you, okay, she wants to go outside to use the bathroom. Now, in a natural setting where she'd be just like, dogs wandering around the woods and so forth in wolf packs, it's not a big question of going to the bathroom. You just go to the bathroom. No big deal. But in modern society, dogs have to know when to say, hey, it's time to go. And the repression of that instinct of, oops, I gotta go, I better go now, will cause a certain level of neurosis. And that is what happens to human beings as well. So when they repress something too much, it comes out in other areas. Now, Freud, though, felt that this pleasure principle suppression was very important and worth it to have the civilization we have today. And Wilhelm Reich wanted to change civilization. He wanted to go for something a little bit more left of center. And so he proposed the idea of unleashing those primal drives. And then when the society did start reformulating, then it would reconceptualize itself around something that would be much more to his liking. Now, the thing is that while he was not the only one, he's given the credit for the sexual revolution, there were a lot of things that kind of helped this along. You had the invention of the birth control pill, which meant that people didn't have to be quite as selective about the mating process. A person could be experimental. Before that, you did have people that messed around before marriage, but there was always a possibility it could lead to pregnancy and the proverbial shotgun wedding. So, it was more likely that if a person wasn't a virgin when they got married, it probably happened when they, with the person they were engaged to. It wasn't a situation where they'd be able to look back and say, oh yeah, well there was this guy here and here and here and here and here, and oh, there was that spring break where there was those 3 guys and so forth. Okay? It wasn't like that. The birth control pill at least took away some of the consequences. But you also threw in this idea that was now that many left-wing people in positions of power in academia and so forth were able to promote, was an idea of maybe marriage itself should be questioned. Maybe everything should be questioned. And so there was this redefining of society that took place. It still defines our politics today. I mean, many of the people you see protesting against conservative policies in the United States are not really motivated by economics. They're not really motivated by foreign policy. Foreign policy doesn't change hardly at all, depending on whether you have a Democrat or Republican. There's so many entrenched interest within the political establishment and in the corporate establishment and the media establishment that there's really not a huge change there. But what really brings people out are issues relating to sexuality. You have, issues of feminism, issues of abortion and gay marriage and any number of these other kinds of related issues. And whether you're for or against these things, one must admit that if it had not been for the sexual revolution, those would not be issues today. had it not been for the redefining, even with the birth control pill, the attempt to redefine and to question that was coming through in so many different sources into the population, then still you would have had a fairly conservative population of people. If you look at Eastern Europe today, for instance, they were under communism. They didn't go through this process. And when communism fell, the people, it was almost like a slingshot back. So, at least when it comes to certain family policies, not abortion. Abortion seems to be like a birth control method still in much of Eastern Europe, aside from Poland. But when it comes to things like other sexual liberation issues, you find that Eastern Europe is very conservative. So anyway, let's take a look and see how this is really what's really happening out there. Now, first of all, I would note something that no matter what forces were out there, and yes, there were government forces that were promoting, for instance, smaller families. I'm not going to go through detail by detail, but yes, there were government forces and foundations, which many people would consider fairly conservative in a sense, that were facilitating a lot of these changes. But then when it came to all these other forces that were out there that were promoting redefining of the family, then I think ultimately you can say that most people, if they see someone, I don't know, they see someone coming at them and, propagandizing, saying, oh my gosh, you shouldn't get married. Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have family. Or this kind of stuff. They would just kind of go, yeah, right. And they would reject it. But if it's done subtly, then you can get the same policies across and you will be successful. So the idea of resisting a lot of the stuff going on in society today doesn't happen because it's almost institutionalized in the society. And it doesn't come across by some radical with a big sign screaming and yelling at people on a campus lawn. It happens by very respected sources. And whether you have the media, whether you have religion to a large degree accepting these kinds of things. I mean, face it, most religion today, most of the preachers today don't preach what they used to preach 50 years ago. I mean, how many ministers today will actually get up in their pulpit and say that large families are fantastic and the best? They don't dare. How many preachers today will condemn divorce? Maybe some of the families that give the most money in donations to the church have had divorces, so not to offend them. But you see, the spirals, the media I've dealt with before, how you show small families, you show plots in which you have characters who are in their 30s and only one couple is getting married or is married, and they have one kid. I mean, this is not necessarily by accident, because you look up Brazil soap opera birth rate reduction in Google, where media has actually purposely tried to present a different way of living to people. Now, then you look even further than this, then you start seeing that maybe the other aspects of our society are also conspiring. Now, remember, I didn't say it's necessarily a conspiracy. I didn't say it wasn't. But they are conspiring to reduce the birth rate as well. First of all, we have a sense that's we don't have family life being presented as a number one goal in our public schools. We don't have a sense of, I remember when I was in school, they used to offer a class called Marriage and Family, but really what it was how to use birth control and how not to get, pregnant and so forth, and maybe some of the issues that you have to look at before you get married. And most of those were like oh my gosh, you're going to have to get a home, you're going to get along with someone, blah, blah, blah. Most 17-year-olds are not thinking about that in that sense, but it still seems somewhat like very negative thing. It's not presented like this will be wonderful, but you have to be mature before you go, and start this. Don't go out there and get pregnant right now and start a family. That's not really the way it comes across, though. And then you have this sense of selfishness that's really promoted by our consumeristic society. A selfishness that you could say, I've called it before, where you create wannabe narcissists. Remember, I say wannabe narcissists because they're not actually narcissists by birth or genetics, which I believe, a person is more predisposed genetically to what we call true narcissism. But it's a wannabe narcissism. So guys are taught, well, this is the way you should be. You think about the image of what a young man, should be if you watch media. And you get this idea of he should be drinking with his buddies, he should be trying to get his best job ever, he should be striving for beating out all the competition. But not a lot of what I would call manly qualities. I don't think drinking beer is a manly quality, okay? Dogs, if you put beer in front of them, will drink. They like the taste of beer. I don't know why. Maybe, considering that dogs also eat and drink some pretty nasty things if they find them in the woods or, when you take them out for a walk. No accounting for taste. But yes, there's a lot of this idea that to be a man means that you just talk stupid and rough and the whole locker room thing, and you drink and you watch sports. Well, yes, that's not exactly what really I would think would define true manhood, in the sense of the more traditional idea of someone who would get married and defend his family and work to provide for his family. Okay? And in women, it's not much better. You got the wannabe narcissist thing, which, oh my gosh, babies would give me I might get stretch marks if I have a baby, or I'm not really ready for marriage yet, but you're 35 years old. Yeah, one of these days I'll get married and have a family. At 35, you might still stand it. Maybe the sperm bank is, you should start looking into that pretty quick if you're single at 35 and you're still intending on having a family. I mean, I'm just talking statistics, okay? Yes, I'm sure everyone has that aunt or whatever who got married at 35 and had 3 kids. Okay, it's just not statistically probable that that's what's going to happen. And so we have this idea that people are delaying significant adult events, such as graduating from, school or getting a job. I'm not talking about a job at a coffee shop. I'm talking about something that's more permanent. Marriage. I believe since 1960, the rate of people by the time they reach 30 who are married is like half of what it was in 1960. People just wait and wait and wait. Now, maybe they're waiting for Mr. or Mrs. Perfect. but often that doesn't exist. And then when they do expect this perfection they see on television, and then they see what life really is all about, then it becomes, oh, this wasn't, what I expected. Well, the thing is, television gives you a total sense of inaccuracy. People can wind up, they're fighting zombies, and there's no shower nearby, but their hair looks clean and styled. There's, and they still have time to wax their underarms or their chest or whatever for a scene. I mean, that's not reality. All right? And what's gone out there in the public, so many young women around the world, like, oh, I want to go to New York, it's so glamorous. Is it really? Is it truly glamorous? Or is it just a big city where it's going to cost you a lot of money and you're not going to be able to save anything, and, et cetera, et cetera? It's more of a delay. Well, I'm just going to live there for a few years. Well, then, again, we're getting this delay. And, this, the also thing that I have to bring out about consumerism is we don't have a sense of cohesion anymore. And I think this is why we're losing religion. Okay? We don't have a sense of, someone says, am I my brother's keeper? I mean, I remember, again, I'm going to bring up a social media post I saw recently where someone said, we need to make sure people learn what techniques are used in the media to manipulate them. And someone responded saying, it's not my business to, tell people what's out there. Don't tell me I should blog or make videos or something like that. Well, if this is the sense we have, then why, then we kind of, will not be attracted to religion, which really is the ultimate in cohesion, where people will have a sense of belonging and kind of an extended family. So right now we have a situation where young people are not going to church, they're not getting married, and we see a suicide rate that's going up, especially amongst young white males. We see drug use going up, and I'm not talking about just alcohol and cigarettes, but, heroin and these kinds of things. We're seeing a sense that there's no one to rely upon anymore. In the old days, yeah. And yes, you take a look at the 1950s. Often, look at a movie. I mean, this is the only frame of reference a lot of people will have. Look at a 1950s movie. Often you have a young man and a young woman who are living in until they start taking off in life, living in a little dingy apartment, but they have each other. And eventually it breaks up. And, growing up, when I was a little kid, I knew people who I knew this one couple living in an Airstream trailer. All right? I used to, one of the daughters was my best friend. They were living in a freaking Airstream trailer. If you don't know what those are, they're smaller, in some ways than, these modern recreational vehicles that old people get in and travel the country when they retire. And, but people still knew that they had to sacrifice and, wait and then get something later. Now, lastly, not only do we have this consumerism that says we have to be financially secure before we can contemplate marriage, and of course, by the time you're financially secure, often most people in today's society will never be financially secure. I'm sorry. If you're thinking of financial security as, okay, I am set, I will have this job, and I'm going to have all these things, and I'm going to have this house, and blah, blah. There is no such thing really as financial security. And it really never totally existed back, in the 50s. Because things can happen. in the 50s, even a plant could shut down or something, and now you're out of a job. Nowadays, the same thing. Oh, by the way, for those people who think that they should define themselves according to their careers, I might note that you can be replaced in whatever career you're in. You can be replaced, within 1 to 7 days. One day if it's an easy one. 7 days maybe if it's a more professional job. But yes, you can and would be replaced. You could be a prestigious professor at a Ivy League school. And if you suddenly get struck by lightning and you're dead, they'll replace you within a week. So think about that sometime when you're thinking about what's really important in life and what isn't. But the thing is that we have a sense that this is what we want. And if we don't have it, then I'm not going to ever strive for it. It's like saying that, well, unless I have the brand new pair of shoes that cost, $500, I'm not going to take up a jogging program to lose weight. Well, maybe it's going to, you just never, get that money together and get those shoes, and then, you never lose the weight. Sometimes your priority, will determine what's going to happen. Is your priority to have a family? Then it might be difficult at first. It might be. But it ultimately will pay off in the future, hopefully. And, it may not match what today's society says, but neither will a lifestyle of being single or getting married and having a dog instead of a family. It's not going to necessarily match what society on TV and in movies says should be where you're at either. Okay? And again, like I said, you could be replaced in no time in any job you have, but you can't be replaced really as a father or mother. So, lastly, I want to deal with back to this idea of, is this like something that you would think is part of some sort of master plan, which, again, I've said in earlier shows that sometimes it's just a groupthink. So I don't know if there's like this X-Files sort of thing in the background, but, the other thing is that we seem to have this, at least in media and academia, questioning of our cultural foundations, to where nothing is sacred. And that's really kind of again, even the most primitive tribal society, they have things that are sacred, be it a sacred mountain, be it a sacred tree, be it a sacred idol or totem or whatever. They always have something sacred, and they always have ancestors they look to say, this ancestor did this. Okay? It could be anything from an epic journey to conquering, a mythical creature. But all societies have it. And now ours doesn't. I mean, our epic journeys, our movies turned out by Hollywood. I mean, that's kind of flimsy. I mean, they're a CGI experience is not the same as a metaphysical experience. And I will say this, that today, maybe it's an outcome of our consumeristic society that people are not happy with it, and they don't know where to aim their hostility towards, so they actually go after the foundations of the society itself, which could go back to something like, when I was talking about Wilhelm Reich. And you start questioning everything. And then nothing is sacred to you, be it religion, be it the history of your society, be it anything that really would hold your culture together. And so therefore, if you have people that don't have that kind of cultural anchor, then it's harder for them to see any importance. It turns into a nihilism. They don't have that sense of importance of let's make those sacrifices that would be necessary to continue this. And that's ultimately having babies and keeping keeping the chain going that your ancestors that had, and then they pass it down to your grandparents and your parents and now to you. You are the result of sacrifice and survival that has taken place for thousands of years. And so when people just say, forget it, I want a fur baby, then that negates that whole experience of your ancestors. In fact, ironically, since most cats and dogs are neutered when you get them, I mean, especially if you're like living in an apartment, you don't want puppies and kittens to occur, then you're ending the line for both them and you. So I think ultimately this has a lot to do with this kind of sense of what matters anymore. I mean, is there anything worth really sacrificing for? And what Martin Luther King said, if you're not willing to die for something, then it's not worth living for. Okay? And most of us, I think, could ultimately say that the one thing that they would risk their lives for is their family. Okay? That's why they always, in war propaganda, you always make it like, we're preserving freedom and safety for your loved ones at home and all this kind of stuff. You don't say, well, you're going to sacrifice your life perhaps so that this oil company will have better profits, or this uranium company will make more money, or that the gross domestic product of the United States will be so much stronger if it has control over these sea lanes, or over this mountain pass, or over this area where you can only find these kinds of rare earths, or whatever. Okay, most people would be just kind of like, I'm not going to make a sacrifice for that. So, but ultimately what we really do sacrifice for is our families. Yes, someone breaks into your house, you're going to risk your life to save yourself, but also, more importantly, your family. And you might actually take your family's safety higher than your own. Okay? That's kind of irrational. That's kind of emotional. But it is what has kept us alive as a species for so dang long, is our emotional self. And right now, we have cut ourselves off from that emotional self. And this is why birth rates are plummeting. This is why perhaps families disintegrate that do get formed. This is why, for instance, people don't seem to have a sense of importance for the things that used to be so important in people's lives, because we essentially are becoming deadened. Okay, we're just becoming like the robots that maybe someday we will actually merge with, and that's not a good thing. How do you reverse it? Well, at the individual level, first, family level, second. We need to make people aware of this. We need to be aware of it ourselves. Religiously, I think that that's going to be very important, although I don't put much faith in too much of mainstream religion really calling into question mainstream culture, because mainstream religion has become part of the consumeristic culture. And so I don't think that there's too much hope there. But perhaps we need something like a social upheaval like we did in the 60s, a questioning of the norms, a questioning of where our society is, the consumeristic society, just trying to get back to what it is to be human beings again, rather than just work units. And, a lot of times people will say that if we would just try to work with the mainstream media, then maybe, just maybe, we could bring them around. Maybe we could get them to be less, hostile to opinions that differ from them, as well as being more fair and unbiased. But I think that is actually not something that's going to happen. Okay? It's not going to happen, and I'll explain why in a moment. First, I would just like to encourage people, if you're listening to this later on YouTube, then please subscribe to this channel so you can keep up on shows even when you might not be available for our live broadcast. Also, check out my new book, Destiny of Our Past, a science fiction dystopian thriller set during the era of Noah. And anyway, the media, will it change? Well, anyone can change. Anyone can repent. But ultimately, I don't think they will. I mean, we could speculate that maybe in the future, pornography would and pornography producers would strive to be more positive to family issues and values and not objectify people. But I really don't think that's going to happen. Okay? I mean, anything's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen. And the same goes for the media when it comes to the way it reports. And what really got me going here on this one, even though we've discussed this in the past, was in early January, just recently, unless maybe you're listening to this later on YouTube, the president of the Mormon Church, Thomas S. Monson, passed away at the age of 90. Now, the thing that really struck me was the way that he was covered by the media. Now, I'm not saying all media, but the New York Times, for instance. The New York Times, which is one of those kinds of, we could say, establishment media, they could have taken a whole bunch of different approaches to his passing when you consider the fact that he's the leader of a religion. He's someone who was very highly respected amongst members of that religion, and also respected by a lot of people that were not members of the religion for his devotion to humanitarian causes. And, this is the way, and I'm going to really get into this more here, and that is, here's the way it was covered for the first couple paragraphs. Thomas S. Monson, who was president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints since 2008, enlarged the ranks of female missionaries, but rebuffed demands to ordain women as priests and refused to alter church opposition to same-sex marriage. Died on Tuesday at his home in Salt Lake City. He was 90. Facing vociferous demands to recognize same-sex marriage and weathering demonstrations at church headquarters by Mormon women pleading for the right to be ordained priests, Mr. Monson did not bend. Now, I'm not going. It doesn't matter which side you're on when it comes to same-sex marriage. It doesn't matter what side you're on when it comes to ordaining women. We don't need to, in a coverage of someone's life, to focus merely on those kinds of issues in order to basically, you may as well paint him in a dark, negative manner to demonize him in a sense. And so, that was the area that's the areas that they concentrated on, not all the stuff he did other than that. Okay? So, since most people only read the first couple paragraphs of a newspaper or the very beginning, you've pretty much set that this was, I don't know, some right-wing fanatic who was standing up against his own members, which I would say that's probably not the case. I've seen some of the things with ordaining women and stuff like that in his church, and it really didn't bring out mass demonstrations. I don't see that there's any kind of, huge outpouring of support for this amongst Mormons. But nevertheless, it made it sound like that there was. Now, the thing is that there was an article that came out just after that. Someone wrote in Patheos. And you can look it up yourself. Patheos, January 4th, 2018, written by a Dan Peterson. And what he does is he compares how the obituaries for Thomas S. Monson, Fidel Castro, and Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy, were dealt with. And, look at the article. Look it up. You'll find that it seems if you were reading through the three individuals and you were deciding who you would like to meet in real life, heck, the way that they describe Castro as a fiery apostle of revolution. That's what? Seriously. Or Hugh Hefner, who he repeatedly likened his life to a romantic movie. It starred an ageless sophisticate in silk pajamas, smoking jacket, hosting a never-ending party for famous and fascinating people. Come on. I'm not saying you should have demonized Hugh Hefner, just to be making a point. But if you take a look at the three individuals, one a communist dictator, the other one had a magazine that had, naked women in it, and the other one who was the spiritual leader of a religion, it seems to me that you could have been a little bit more, how should I say, fair and unbiased towards the presentation of his many achievements. But you see, I don't think the media is going to be that way. I think there is a culture within the media that immediately looks upon anyone who is, either, I'm going to say this in fairness, either on the far right or what they perceive as the far right and what they perceive as the far left as being automatically bad. And so if you question the establishment, if you come out and condemn something like the military-industrial complex. Let's say you're from the left and you're really fighting when it comes to militarization of America or those kinds of issues. I don't think the general media out there, the kind that often gets labeled as fake news, I don't think they're going to be any more loving to you than they will be to those on the right. Because there is a culture there. There is the kind, if you think about the idea, and I pointed this out in a previous show, that every single occupation, every single economic strata has its own culture. And there is definitely a culture within the media. And you know what's interesting is, unlike other cultures and subcultures in the United States, the media has the enviable position of being able to make itself look like the hero at all times. Because by default, because they will continue publishing things, even they may lose subscriptions here and there, but overall they're going to have enough subscriptions and enough traffic that they're going to continue with saying and doing things as they already are. In fact, in recent years, it seems like they've taken more license because they found that they can get away with it. All right, so there is that. It doesn't seem like they have really a cognitive dissonance when they're saying that they're unbiased, but at the same time they're biased. Okay, and the thing, ultimately, I think at some point we have to just replace it. We have to have alternatives. We cannot rely on the media as our source of information, at least not the big media. Okay? And so that means not even, maybe it's going to have to come to boycotting. Maybe it's going to have to come to a point where people are going to have to just say, okay, this is the only way to reach them. But you know that by reaching them, you're only going to maybe slow it down or get them to think, well, maybe you should write that a little nicer, or so forth. I think ultimately it's going to have to be, people just on the right and maybe on the left too, organizing and just saying no more. Because it just isn't going to clean itself up. And ultimately, on a lot of issues, I don't care how you feel about abortion or gay rights or something like that. Okay? There are issues such as, our relations with other countries, such as Russia, militarization, this whole idea that maybe our constitutional rights should take should just kind of be phased out, all in the name of security or social harmony or whatever. These are things that are as big a threat to the right as the left. And these are issues that people need to come together on and not just fight each other on. Okay? I know conservatives who agree completely on many issues with liberals. But those are the issues that it seems that the establishment media disagrees with both. Maybe for a different reason, but they disagree with both. And that's why I think ultimately they demonize, or at least present in a negative form. So ultimately, is the media going to change? I don't think so. Is it going to change? Is it going to continue as it is, as a very influential aspect of American culture? Yes, it will, unless people actually take some form of action and try to hit them where it hurts, just stop buying stuff that's advertised in their pages or on their TV shows. And at that point, when that revenue starts drying up, that's when you might have at least some impact on them. But ultimately, what needs to be done is we need to support grassroots alternative media that will bring information out and just a refreshment away from this corporate media and corporate concentration. Anyway, that's all the time we have, and hope you have a good week, and see you next week here on another edition of Unlock the Door Radio. Take care now.